What's going on, guys? We're back with part 15 of our Learn C# tutorial, and we're going to continue where we left off and go ahead and make a collision for our Projectile class. And so we're just going to go ahead and do public. We'll go ahead and make this virtual as well, so we can override it later, and we'll call it on collide. Now you'll notice I didn't use one of the ones we had learned about before, like on collision enter, on collision exit, just on collision. And the reason is the child class can access those by itself whenever it wants to. So we can just use this. I'll show you what I mean. We can use this to, in addition to our normal collision. So on the actual collision here, we'll do public void on collision enter, and then taking in a collision, call it call. Now this is the actual collision. You'll notice I did not mark this one as virtual. It's just a void. However, from this so it cannot be overridden. But from this function here, we will call on collide. So no matter what, we can still override this and do something. But what we don't want to we want to always do the code in the collision enter here, which is to first destroy ourselves, and then we'll do if call dot game object dot get component I health. Then so this is saying if the colliding object has an I health attached, then we'll go ahead and do damage, and we'll just put damage. Let's go ahead and make that as well public. We'll make this virtual. Actually, we'll make both of these virtual. Public virtual int integer damage, and we'll default that to 1. And same for the speed, so we want to override this in the children classes. Okay. Now once again, let me explain why it was such a an easy thing to use our iHealth and set a generic iHealth class, and then instead of using just one class for the player, one class for the enemies. And the reason is just for this, because our projectile is reusable by any. We can make a player projectile, we can make an enemy that shoots projectiles at the player, and we can use the same class here because it's just doing its motion, it has its collision, and now we're just getting this I health. And the player, if you remember, the player has a generic health, and right now the enemy doesn't have any health, obviously, but we're about to attach an enemy health to him as well. We might as well actually stick the generic health on there as well, unless we want to make some sort of boss enemy later on. But now we can go ahead and just get the generic iHealth class. So if it has any class of type iHealth, whether it's our generic health or a boss health or whatever, it will still attempt to do damage no matter what. And that's why it was a really good thing to use a generic iHealth class. Okay, so what this does is on collision enter, it'll call on collide, which if it has not been overridden, it'll do nothing, but obviously the projectile can't override this. Then it'll destroy itself, and if the collision has a health component attached, do damage to that health component. So let's go ahead and actually implement this. We'll make it our first projectile. We'll call it player standard projectile. I don't like the name. We'll make it I don't know. How about beam shot? Public class beam shot, if I can spell it, and we're going to inherit from I projectile. Now you notice we do not have to, because it's not marked as abstract, we're not forced to implement anything. These are all optional things we can do. But we can go ahead and make override, and then we can override the motion and on collide here. So we'll go ahead and we'll override the on collide, and we'll do You do print. Hey, it worked. Whoops. And then if we want to, we can... I'm not going to override the motion just because... Well, just because. But if we want to, we can also go ahead and... that brings up another point I forgot to mention. If you remember, I think it was in the last video, we marked these properties as virtual. Now, usually for properties, you want to mark them as abstract if you want them to be able to be overridden, because virtual is usually for things like when it actually has to do code. This is just setting a value. So if we had something like a getter and a setter implementation, it's sort of, we don't need to go into that right now, then that's what that would be for. So right now, we can just go ahead and remove the virtuals, and it will still appear even if we slap on a beam shot component to something, because it inherits from iProjectile, which has these public variables. It will still pop up in the inspector. So let me go ahead and I'll pause the video and load up Unity. Alrighty. First thing I want to do is just slap on a health component to our enemies here. We'll give our cubes. We'll just give them both one health for now. Okay. Then we're going to want to attach our what do we call it? Player combat. Okay. We'll have the rate of fire the same. Let's go ahead and create our fire transform now. Control Shift N will create a blank game object. We'll call this fire position. And you're going to want to drag this from our hierarchy view onto our player until it looks like this. And what that does is makes fire position a child of player. And what that means is you'll notice it's to the left -4 units from our... Where'd he go? Oh. Zero this out. Okay. You'll notice it is exactly on our player right now. And if we move our player and then reselect our fire position, you'll notice it's still in the center of the player, and that's because its position is relative to its parent, or the player position. Okay? And then we'll go ahead and make its fire position like here. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, once we actually get this up and running, we're going to go ahead and have to implement some sort of code where, depending on if we're moving left or right, it'll rotate the character to face the correct way. Right now, it's not a big deal because obviously it's just a white capsule. It wouldn't make any difference. But in game, if you have some sort of weapon, it'd have to be facing the right way, and the player would have to be animating the right way. So we'll get around to that in a minute. One other thing I want you to do is we'll have to rotate this guy 90 degrees in this direction. And that is because you want the blue one facing out. The blue one is your z-axis, or its forward axis. So that's why we want that there. And then we can go ahead and drag this onto its fire transform. Let's go ahead and make a projectile now. So let's make let us make a cylinder. Why not? Eventually, I do plan on getting around to. Well, actually, I don't like that shape. Never mind. If you remember, I said the blue axis was the one that was its forward, and its forward was like pointing off to the side, not the way I would want the capsule to look, or the cylinder to look. So that's why. For a sphere, it doesn't matter which way the axis is pointing, because it's going to look like a sphere, you know, either way. So we'll go shrink this down to like, 0.3. And we will attach a projectile, what do we call it? Beam shot with 6 speed and 1 damage, and we're going to go ahead and call it beam shot. We'll drag on here and make a new prefab, delete it from the game, and then drag on the projectile here. You'll notice now, even though if I hit Control Z, it wants to take in an eye projectile. However, a beam shot, if we drag it on, it's a beam shot, not an eye projectile. The reason that works is because beam shot inherits from my projectile. Let's go ahead and save it. And one thing I just noticed. Oh, well, we'll see to make sure first. But if I click, yeah, you'll notice. Oh, I should have disabled enemies for the time being. You'll notice I can click and hold it down, and it'll keep spawning stuff as long as our rate of fire continues. However, our motion isn't quite working, but it is colliding with the enemies. It is just not doing damage to them either. So there's a couple things we want to take a look into. So first thing, I felt really stupid, but I just wanted to make sure. We created this motion function, but we're never calling it. And there's another thing too, but I'll make sure. I'd like to show off what I mean first. If we make an update function and we call motion, whoops, it will move. But I have a hunch that it's not going to move the way we want it to. And let me make sure first before I speak. Okay, so one thing you'll notice, if I'm moving backwards, it looks like the beam is moving super fast, but if I move forwards, it's almost as if, it's going at slow motion. So you want it to be, and that's fine, because that's how it should be realistically, but we want it to move left, or like aim where the mouse is eventually. On top of that, we need to collision to work, first of all, and I think that's all I wanted to cover. So this video is getting kind of lengthy, so I'm probably going to stop it here. In the next video, I'm going to go ahead and finish up our collision, and then continue from there.